I began to get a bit self-conscious of my weight. I wasn't overweight, but I certainly wasn't skinny either. High school had long since passed, and my metabolism currently reminded me that I couldn't keep eating the same careless way without putting at least a nominal effort into shedding some pounds. After a few rounds of publicly embarrassing myself at the local gym, I decided to try something a little bit easier. I lived within walking distance of a beautiful park and I began hiking. I had a variety of trails, of which the beginner trails were the only ones even close to my skill level. I could take a nice walk at my own pace, away from the judgmental eyes of meathead gym rats while listening to some audiobooks. It wasn't going to result in drastic weight loss by any means, but at least it was some sort of physical activity. I soon realized hiking wasn't all that bad, if you could put aside the sweating and the bug bites. God, the bug bites. The fresh air and pleasant scenery relaxed me, and the low-impact cardio would definitely help to jumpstart my sluggish metabolism. I was tearing through audiobooks at record speeds. I found myself nearly finished with what had seemingly been an unending list of them. I'm sure most people would have preferred to just bask in the glory of nature, listening to the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves. But I'm the sort of individual who feels as though if I wasn't constantly multitasking, I was wasting my time. My small slice of forest, which really wasn't all that much of a forest at all, was only a few miles from suburbia in any direction, and as a result, had no issues of threatening wildlife like bears or cougars. If we did, I had never heard nor encountered them. There may be a pack of coyotes roaming in the woods that the trail cuts through, but even if I heard them coming, I doubted I would have any chance of getting away. The earbuds stayed in on my walks. My mother's warnings of stranger danger and to always be completely aware of your surroundings were out the window. I generally wasn't one to take risks or put myself in potentially dangerous situations, but hiking in the woods was on the very edge of my comfort zone. I reasoned that as long as I stay on the trail, everything would be fine. It would be nearly impossible to get lost or injured. After a few months of my new hobby, I was on a trail that I had traversed countless times. My wireless earbuds had died and I mentally scolded myself for forgetting to charge them the night before. I decided that I would just cut my walk short for that day. As I took these silent earbuds out and made an about face, heading back where I came from, I heard something. A sound so faint that it was nearly imperceptible. After a few seconds it came again, still distant but audible enough that if I held still and strained my ears, I could just barely make it out. It sounded like a symphony of tinkling bells, certainly not something that would naturally occur in the forest. I had just begun to walk away when I heard it again. There was no mistaking it. That was definitely bells. It sounded like those little Christmas sleigh bells my mom used to hang on the door around the holidays. I was mildly curious, sure, but my interest had waned and I began to walk away once more. After all, it was just a hint of bells in the woods. A cat probably got its collar caught in a bush and the wind was making the little bell ring. I had reasoned. But what stopped me for a third time was a flash of light flickering through the trees, coinciding perfectly with the peal of bells. For some reason, unbeknownst to me, I held my breath and counted. After 5 seconds, I saw that flash of white again, the bell sound following suit. But now the bells were louder, almost as if the source had grown closer. My curiosity overriding my sense of self-preservation, I did something that I regret to this day. I took a few steps off the trail towards the sound. I thought that if I just kept the trail in my line of sight and didn't stray too far, that I would be fine. Carefully taking a few steps into the overgrown wilderness, mincing my way through the branches and the roots, I froze, glancing around trying to spot the source of the strange noise. At first, I didn't see anything. I heard the bells now chiming in 5-second intervals, and thought that I saw the wind flutter leaves in front of me at the same time that the bells rang. My blood ran cold as I realized my mistake. The source of movement wasn't leaves, but something else. 4 figures of what appeared to be masses of moss and lichen took a single lurching step forward every 5 seconds. They were vaguely human-shaped blobs of green and brown. It reminded me a bit of those ghillie suits that I had seen soldiers wear on TV, though I couldn't think of any logical scenario in which soldiers would be in the woods, wearing ghillie suits and ringing bells. I should have just walked away from the odd sight, gone home and taken a nice nap. But instead, I remained motionless, studying these strange moss shapes. Something about the way that they were moving unsettled me on a primal level. The forest floor was covered in fallen branches and other obstacles, yet every time they moved, it looked as if they simply glided across the forest floor. Each step covered an unnatural amount of distance. They weren't very tall, and yet they moved with a curiously large stride. I shook my head, wondering if this was a heat stroke-induced hallucination. There had to be a reasonable explanation. Perhaps a strange military training exercise, or some weird kids playing dress-up, or, on the extreme, a cult doing some messed-up ritual stuff. A second sound weaved its way to my ears. In addition to the bells, there now seemed to be singing. I couldn't make out words nor tune, yet it was distinctly musical all the same. In the front of the moss figures stood yet another figure. This one, instead of various mosses, wore a simple sheet of white fabric. This time, as the moss figures simultaneously took their lunging step forward, and the bells rang once more, the white figure appeared. It twirled, like a ballerina doing a pirouette before disappearing so quickly, I would have missed it if I had blinked. When it appeared once more and did its strange little spin, the white fabric clung slightly to the face of whatever remained beneath the fabric. The moment that I glimpsed the ghostly visage, my body was no longer my own. I froze, my jaw slack and my arms hanging limply at my sides. After 5 seconds, I took a step forward, doing a perfect pirouette in tandem with the white figure. My mind was in a haze. I wasn't concerned in the slightest by the lack of control over my own body. With each ring of the tinkling bells, I stepped closer to the moss figures until I had fallen in line behind them. It felt like I was experiencing everything in third person, watching myself walking and twirling every 5 seconds like a well-trained pet. The strange, implacable music tone rose to a crescendo, growing more urgent with every rendition. It was a beautiful song, the most beautiful thing that I had ever heard. Paired with the bells, I never wanted to hear anything else. Only a few moments had passed and I was already more than comfortable tossing away my life to fall in line with these piles of moss twirling through the woods. As I moved, I lost track of time. As the strange march continued, the forest started to change colors, or more accurately, the colors became more vibrant. The greens transformed into a lime instead of the usual emerald tone of the woods. The sunlight pierced through the leaves in beams of glittering orange, iridescently shining in such breathtaking shades. If this was a dream, I was happy to remain in it forever. Soon, I started to hum along with the song, simultaneously not knowing the words and yet knowing nothing but them. I was hardly aware of my own body. My feet moved, yet I didn't feel them touch the ground. I felt nothing aside from the sun's rays caressing my face. When I did catch brief glances of my arms, I saw a flash of green winding its way up my fingertips towards my arms. Somewhere, buried in the deepest recesses of my being, a part of myself was screaming, fighting to get back in control. If I didn't get away, would I become moss like the ones that I was following behind? Is that what my fingers were turning into? It looked too bright to be moss, but I didn't want to take any chances. I needed to leave before things escalated. That aware part of myself was so small that it nearly didn't register. I didn't think that I could break out of this march. I had already succumbed to the peaceful feelings and the beauty surrounding me. There was no point in going back to normal life. That small part of myself should just accept it and be silent so I could just fall asleep. It did feel like falling asleep, like I was wrapped in a warm pile of blankets, a cool oasis with rain pattering around me. That feeling of a perfect time to sleep. I wanted nothing more than to just let that feeling take me under. But then a thought came from the minuscule part of me still resisting. What had gotten me to come closer to start with? It wasn't the bells, not really. I could have walked away at any time until I saw that flash of white. That flash of a face under that white sheet. Suddenly, an urge stronger than just submitting myself completely seeped through. I saw a face. I couldn't remember what the face looked like, only that I wanted to know, needed to see it again. That urge was the only thing that saved me. When the next set of bells came, I willed myself to take a bigger step forward, needing to get to the front of the line, needing to overtake the blankets of moss. None seemed to notice that I was getting closer and disrupting the order of things. When I should have been one step away from bumping into one of the moving blankets of moss, I took another step with a twirl, finding myself in front of it. They didn't step aside from me. They didn't react. I didn't even remember passing them. And yet, I was in the middle of the line. My humming was faltering and falling out of sync as I was focusing so much on taking larger steps. Fighting through the hazy, dreamlike state that overcame me, I kept going. The urge of that mystery face, my sole motivation. With each step, the colors began to flicker and warp. The beautiful forest I had seen just moments before was becoming duller, leaching back to the normal colors. Seeing that beauty fade caused such a deep ache in my chest, I nearly abandoned my quest of seeing the white figure's face. That ever-growing conscious part of me, I felt like just the smallest of glances of the white figure would be worth it. The song was fading the closer that I got to the front of the line. When I finally was in front of the last moss blanket, I only heard the normal forest sounds. It took every ounce of willpower not to twirl when I heard the bell. My body screamed in protest, my muscles crying out as if some force was tugging at them all at once to move. But still I stayed, waiting in agony for the white shape to appear. When it did, I was in such pain that I didn't even see the face hidden under the sheet. Knowing that I would not be able to have another chance, I reached out my hand, trying to touch the sheet before it faded. I would either faint from the pain or be forced back into the march. My fingers touched the soft fabric the moment before our leader had faded. It broke the routine and turned its face to look at me. All the pain went away and my breath caught as I looked at the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Beyond those colors of the forest that I saw before, beyond anything any human might have ever laid eyes on. Nothing could have ever had the right to hold that much wonder, and yet it was right in front of me. Colors around me rushed in, making me wonder if I was going to be a part of the march again, but that calm feeling only lasted a second. The face that was looking over me gave a shocked expression. A small intake of air was heard, then the face melted away into pure, clean water. The water dropped to the ground, the dirt absorbing it in seconds. The white sheet in my hand faded away, leaving me alone and confused in the woods. The sense of loss that was carved into my chest was so deep that it drowned out all other sensation. After a few seconds of confusion, I looked around realizing that I was not on the trail. Pain came flooding into my limbs. My legs felt like they were on fire and the soles of my feet throbbed. Sweat stung the numerous scratches covering my face. I felt like I was moments away from collapsing. I forced myself to stay awake, to try and figure out what was going on and to recall why I was so beat up. Looking around, I saw no traces of the moss figures or anything that could tell me what had happened or transpired. Felt like I had walked for days. My throat was so dry that I couldn't speak or try to call for help. Stumbling forward, each step a miniature battle. If I lost a single one, I wouldn't make it out of that forest. When my body finally did collapse, I was so exhausted and dehydrated I wasn't even aware that I had found the trail again. I looked like the Walking Dead and I felt like it too. Clothing torn from the bushes, bug bites all over and any exposed flesh was scratched. I was in a sorry state when a family found me on the trail. Without them, I may very well have not made it. I woke up in the hospital equally as confused as the police. I was missing for 3 days. As far as they could tell, I spent those 3 days just walking aimlessly in the woods. They had questioned me, seeing if I somehow got lost or walked off on purpose. I didn't have a believable answer for them, so I just lied. I told them that I went off the trail for a washroom break in the middle of the hike, and didn't remember much of what had happened after. It was the best that I could come up with. I felt as if it could be the truth. What I saw could have been a dream while I was in the hospital. It did feel so very dreamlike after all. After recovering, I was very close to convincing myself that my brain just made up the moving moss blankets, and that face that I so desperately wanted to see again. Weeks after the incident, I was in a bed at home, staring at the ceiling. I found it hard to sleep no matter how long I tossed and turned. I just stared up in the dark, almost as if my body was waiting for something my brain wasn't aware of. I haven't gone hiking since. I avoid any kind of wooded area. I was now terrified at just how easily I fell under the spell of whatever I came across in the woods. Real or not, I didn't want to risk it. My window was open, letting the sounds of the leaves rustling drift into my room, along with the normal sounds of the night. When I heard it, bells. I shot up in bed, straining to hear more, counting to 5 and gripping my blankets in anticipation over the bells that never came. Staying awake for hours, I didn't give up hearing it. I counted to 5 over and over again, until I drifted off into sleep. The incident in the woods remained in the back of my mind as the years passed. I sometimes thought that I could hear the bells in the wind during warm summer days. Only recently have I started to hear them more clearly. My boots have been sitting by the door untouched. Every time that I hear those chimes, I find myself automatically moving towards them. I fear someday that I won't be able to stop myself, that I'll just put on my hiking boots for the last time and go back into those woods, trying to find that figure hiding such a perfect face under that white sheet. I hear the bells more often now. Who knows when that day is going to arrive? I feel as if it might be soon.